um, as I say, today is going to be more of a practical session, and we're going to be thinking about what it means for us to be good news to the planet. There are two different main bits. In a moment, Mark Baxby is going to share on behalf of those of you who have been part of a thing called Carbon Conversations. I'll let him explain all of that. And it's fair to say that Carbon Conversations focuses on what we can do as individuals and households. After Mark's spoken for 10 minutes or so, I'm going to show a conversation I had with a woman called Ruth Valerio. She visited us a few years ago to talk about environmental issues. She's going to talk about what we might do collectively as a community. And after that, there'll probably be just a couple of minutes for us to respond immediately as a larger group. But the idea is that we might talk about this at our next church meeting in terms of our collective response. But I'm going to start waffling and hand over to Mark. Thanks very much for agreeing to share. I realise this is on behalf of a group of people, but I'll let you explain more.
Thanks, Simon. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, the Carbon Conversations group is a small group. It's kind of a 6-session course that, as Simon said, focuses on the individual response to looking at our carbon footprint and trying to reduce that. Basically, it's focused on trying to reduce our CO2 emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously other environmental issues, but this one's focused mainly on the CO2 emissions that are related to global warming, climate change. In the group, it was actually Rachel Hurst that sort of arranged it. There was 9 of us in the group, some from Chapel A, with 2 leaders facilitators, and the course went through a particular book in different sessions. We started in February, I think we might have done the first one in January, but then mainly through February, and then we had to stop because we've not met. There's a couple more sessions we haven't done yet because of lockdown. But it was split into the different sessions, looking at different areas of our lives, really, and looking in detail, trying to look in detail at where our carbon footprint comes from. And those different areas were energy at home and work, travel and transport, food and water, and then consumption and waste. That's not food, so buying stuff, basically. And looking at our individual responses and how we can reduce our carbon footprint to that. Just a bit of a general overview. So in terms of carbon CO2 emissions, sort of average per year for an individual around the world is about 4 tons as a whole population of the world. So per person is around 4 tons. There's different figures that you'll find, but more or less the sort of general part. So in the UK, an individual would probably, the average is 15 tons. In the US, it's about 20. And in Tanzania, it's 0.3. So there's a huge difference. But the aim of what it suggested in the Carbon Conversations group was that we look at, first of all, try and get a measure of our own current carbon footprint and be looking to reduce it to a reasonable level for us in the UK with maybe 6 tons of CO2. So from an average currently, which is about 15 tons, so that's quite a big jump. We, Lisa and myself, we tried to figure that out for ourselves, and we worked out we were about 11. So that made us feel a bit better, but then looking at what the target was, it's still a challenge. I've asked a few people. I emailed a few people in the. I emailed everybody in the group and got some responses about what different people have done in their own lives to try and reduce that. And the group consisted of a mixture of families with kids, couples in sharing a house, and people living on their own. So there's a bit of a mixture. And I start with the introduction was trying to look at what a low carbon future might look like. So these really are the general principles and what we're aiming for in the future. Fewer consumable goods, less travel, almost no air travel, highly insulated buildings, more local production of food and other goods, and carbon taxes and carbon rationing. So I'm not going to go into huge detail about specific things that we can do. I'm going to give different examples of what we've done as a group in the group, but not go to big detail because there's far too much of it. And also I want to say that we're all on different, I guess we're all on different points of the journey. So also in terms of jobs, there are some people who travel a lot, including flying. Some people work from home. So that makes a difference. So we're all on different points. And to be honest, I feel like in terms of my willingness to change, and looking at that and looking at the things that we might need to do, I feel like a bit of a back of the queue within that group. Yeah, I enjoy cycling and go outside and that sort of thing. So I feel like there's a plus point for that. But then when you look at different things and the different things that we can do, I don't feel so good. So I'm just going to start with energy at home. Basically, CO2 emissions are linked to energy use. So energy use at home, energy use in the production of stuff. So the more things, the more energy we use and the more energy that's used in what we buy means a bigger CO2 emission. So in the home, I'll just go through things what people have said about what they've done in the home. So one family said that their house is really quite big, old, drafty. So the next thing they're looking to do once lockdown's out is actually try and get that sorted, to try and get better insulation. Simple things like changing light bulbs to low energy. LED are the best, use less energy. Somebody said that they feel they've got as far as they can with what they can do in the house insulation and stuff without going. The bigger step is a lot more expensive. So that is also maybe a barrier, but a choice. There are certain things that we can do which will be relatively easy, but then there'll be a step where it'll become more difficult and involve more cost, maybe actual financial cost, and also cost to what we do, our own lifestyle sort of sacrifice. Somebody said one of the things we've suggested that you can get a consultant come in, get a man to come in and have a look around your house and see where you can save energy, basically, whether that's insulation, other things, but do a proper assessment of your house. Moving on to travel and transport. Obviously, the less we travel, the less carbon emissions we have. So I know me, Lisa and myself and a few others have decided we're not going to fly. Well, this year, we were talking about this yesterday, and we couldn't quite come to say we are definitely never ever going to fly again. That feels too big as a decision. Again, that's another thing, isn't it? It's the mindset as well. But this year we'd planned to travel by train anyway when we go on our holiday, maybe train to Europe. I know another couple decided instead of flying to New York or doing a cruise for a big birthday, they've decided to travel by train and do their holidays by train.
Mark, you've just muted yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, in terms of food and consumption of water, we haven't done this session yet. This is, but we've looked into it on the chapter, and the more you look into where things come from, this has been, I think a few people have said this is where we've learned quite a lot. Actually, the carbon footprint of different food stuff, where it comes from, and all that has been quite an education. And so making choices about what we buy in food, in terms of food, that's made us think quite a lot. So we have made some changes in that for ourselves, trying to buy more locally and that sort of thing. So obviously things that come in are flown in fresh, out of season fruit like tomatoes, berries, even flowers have a high CO2 footprint, whereas locally sourced that don't have to travel very far in season is much less. So even tomatoes grown out of season in the UK has got high carbon footprint because it has to be in heated greenhouses. Although there was looking at transportation on container ships has quite a low carbon footprint. So in season fruit from other places may be quite low carbon. And then consumption and waste, just buying stuff. Obviously everything that we gets made has an energy, a CO2 footprint. So it's being aware, and it also has to get moved in. So there's the transport of that. So again, it can get quite complicated. I'm sort of feeling that this may be not quite as helpful because I'm not going into specifics, but I suppose the main important thing for doing when we're doing the course is actually finding out things, being more aware, being educated about where things come from, what the process is made, how things are made, how much energy is used, and that is quite difficult. There are places you can find out. I'm going to try and do some links so that maybe next week I can send some links out, either by the WhatsApp or by email, about how we can find this thing. If those people who've done the 40 Acts will have over Lent, there's quite a lot of information in that to help with that. So I think in summary, it is about considering, I think for us, it's about knowing, I suppose measuring currently about what your carbon footprint is, and there are various ways of doing that, and then looking at how you can reduce that. And as I said, as individuals, there are certain things that will make it easier, but there will become a point where it will become more difficult. One of the interesting ones about travel was we came to examples, and it was about so somebody's actually they now work from home rather than travel. They've changed their job and they work from home, and this is before the course, but that's obviously considerably reduced their carbon footprint. Some of the choices may be more difficult. So do you work closer to where you live, or do you move to closer to where you work? That can be a choice. Again, that's a big choice that goes beyond the small choices that we can also make. I guess in summary, they can be quite emotive because we are at different points, and you see people, you hear news stories, or you see people in your own life, your friends or whatever, and you think they're doing that. We were having a discussion yesterday morning about the carbon footprint of cheese, and somehow we got onto a couple of other things, and it ended up with being, but you eat beef, you eat steaks. It had the potential of getting slightly out of control, but we have to, and the Carbon Conversations group has been good because it has been a place where we can share those kind of difficulties. It's set out to be a non-judgmental place where we can explore those. I guess explore this journey and go on it together. So, yeah, sorry that I'm now running out. I'm going to stop now, otherwise I'll just start waffling. But yeah, be gracious is, in all of this, is probably the thing to finish on. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. I think all of the 40 Acts stuff is still available on our website to have a look at. Is that right, Dave?
Is that right? I can send the link to the PDF that's on there, yeah.
So if people want to follow this up a bit more, there's an opportunity there, and obviously there's lots and lots of stuff online as well. Thanks for that, Mark. And responding to the current climate crisis needs to happen at all sorts of levels. Some of us are more or less involved in campaigning. You might have heard of Extinction Rebellion. There is a partner organisation called Christian Climate Action, and there are folk in our community and beyond in Leeds who are very involved in actually direct action to raise awareness of climate. But in the middle, there is the question of what we do as a community. And I thought that I would ask a lady called Ruth Valerio. She visited, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, to talk about some of these issues. And now I'm waffling, so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you will get to see the little chat that I had with Ruth a couple of days ago. So Ruth, it's lovely to see you, and welcome virtually to Chapel A. You were here a few years ago and you were working for A Rocha, but now you have a new role. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, well, firstly, just to say hello. It's really lovely to see you on a computer screen, and lovely kind of not quite to see all of you who are watching this, but I feel like I'm with you in some way. So I now work for Tearfund, which probably quite a few of you will have heard of. It's a Christian relief and development charity that works in about 45 countries, really reaching into the poorest communities. And I head up what's called the Global Advocacy and Influencing Group. And I shan't bore you with the details around that.
That looks like something we might have to look up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was sort of interacting with you a bit on social media at the start of Lent because you were chosen by the Archbishop of Canterbury. I don't know quite how that happens, but you've had a book out this year, which was the Archbishop's Lent book. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I think the choosing is just one level down from when they choose the Pope. You know, it's that level of importance, kind of waiting for the smoke to come out. I think a group of very important people huddle in a room and then they help the Archbishop decide who is going to write his Lent book for him. So there is a series called the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book, which sometimes the Archbishop writes, sometimes he commissions someone else to write. And he wanted it this year to focus on environmental and poverty issues, particularly from a global perspective, and with a really good, strong biblical underpinning. So I set two. I was chosen, which was a huge privilege and terrifying, and wrote a book called Saying Yes to Love. Goes through Genesis 1, through that first creation narrative, and each chapter looks at one of the days of creation and explores the thing that was created on that day, whether it's water or light or trees or humans, and looks at it from a biblical perspective, but then looks at what's the situation today and how can we be responding.
Wow. Well, that sounds... Yeah, I haven't read it. I do know that there's a few folk in Chapel A who have.
Right.
So that sounds like a great sort of theological foundation. And we've been looking at theological foundations for engaging with particularly kind of what you might call creation care or even kind of environmental justice. Last week we looked at the counter arguments. We looked at why some Christians think it's a red herring or even are very strongly against the environmental movement. But this week we're out trying to ask the question, well, what do we do? And for a church to have an environmental impact, obviously we do. We buy things, we consume things. We want to move forward as a community in terms of how to be a positive force as a community. And I just thought this is something that you've been thinking about for many years. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we as a community could do good to the environment.
Yeah, great. And actually Saying Yes to Life looks at that. It's got lots of practical things all the way through and draws on the example of churches from all around the world. So there's lots of stuff in there as well that I hope would inspire people. When I think of how we respond as churches to the challenges that we've got, both poverty and environmental, and of course the two are completely inextricably linked, as we're seeing now in the pandemic, but that might be another discussion. I sometimes talk about standing in the gap. The way we respond as church is we stand in the gap, and we respond by giving, acting and praying. So I wish the gap didn't start with G, because I don't really think it's the best thing to start with the money thing. But, you know, I do think how we use our money, it says where our values are and what we really think. And for us as individuals and in our churches to be thinking and looking at where do we put our money? Is it all going to internal things and what are those internal things, and where we're giving to mission and ministry, does that mission and ministry also support organisations who are caring for the wider world as well? So thinking about our giving, and then I'm going to skip, I'm going to do a different order because I want to focus on the acting. Then pray, I'd really put that in, and I wouldn't discount the importance of us as churches praying. I really believe in the power of prayer to make a difference. I think we saw that in the Paris climate talks 5 years ago, and we've seen that in other places as well. So find ways in your prayer life as a church. Please do be including also praying for the environmental problems that we're facing as well. Tear Fund, Christian Aid, CAFWAD, a whole range of organisations launched a year of prayer for the climate. That was when we thought we were leading up to COP at the end of the big climate change talks at the end of the year. We'll now keep that going into next year up until whenever those climate talks happen. So there's lots of good prayer resources out there on different organisations' websites. At Tear Fund, we've put together a whole climate prayer resource. So pray, please pray, because prayer does make a difference. And then acting, different things that we can do in our churches. One is getting engaged politically, and I think some of your members, I think you're kind of quite a politically engaged church, and quite a few of your members are already quite some way down this road, which is great. And there are things that you can do corporately as a church as well. So if there is an election coming up, which of course we know isn't going to be for a while, but or you might have local elections, I don't know. But when you've got particular moments coming up, why not get your MP in or your local council representatives? You could have a meeting with the head of your council, ask her or him to come in and to talk to you about what's happening in your area, your local authority, whatever the structure is around you, and get engaged in those climate change campaigns that are happening, that I imagine quite a few of your members are individually involved with, but you could do that together as church as well. So again, Tear Fund, but other organisations too, we're regularly running campaigns around climate, and as a church you can get involved at that core. And then I think there are things that you can do in your actual church life, and a lot of that is just about being aware of what you do, but doing it in a way that's more sustainable. So an obvious thing for me is thinking about refreshments, and particularly meals. If you have church meals together, maybe a lunch after a meeting, or whatever it is you do you think at all about the kind of food that is being provided and where that comes from? I like to use the phrase default veg. So I would encourage you as individuals, but also when you're meeting together as a church and doing a meal, go default veg. Just have it that your default option is veg, but you can say to people, if they have a dietary requirement that means they require meat, to let the people organising it know. So meat is available if that is a genuine need, but the default option is veg, and it might even be vegan, depends, but I'm not pushing that. So thinking about your food is a great way collectively to be bringing these things into the sort of the front of our minds. And you're doing this already, so I don't really think I need to say this, but regularly including these kind of issues in your church life, in your sermons and your prayers, as I said, in your children's work and your youth work. I shall pause there.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. We have a monthly breakfast, and I have warned those who prepare the breakfast to get all the bacon sandwiches in before today
Yeah.
is probably the day that breakfast goes veggie.
Oh, do you know, I used to so love a good English breakfast. I'm not fully vegetarian. I will eat meat. I've kind of kept myself flexible for if I'm in a situation where meat is served. But I'm predominantly meat free, and I don't cook meat at home. And I've just found naturally as I've done that, my tastes and what I crave have changed. So now if I'm presented with an option for breakfast, actually the full English breakfast doesn't look so attractive to me as it used to. It's really interesting. And that's come about not by forcing myself not to eat meat, but just by gradually reducing it down. And I think my insights have kind of changed, and the psychology of it has changed along the way. So it's not a big issue for me anymore now.
Brilliant. Ruth, thank you ever so much for your time. And who knows, we may meet again in this world, if not the next. So bless you. Thank you ever so much. And
Great. You're welcome. Lovely to be with you all.
I'm sure that will give us plenty to think about and plenty to do.
Fab. Thank you, Simon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
There we go. There we go. We've got a couple of minutes before we are due to go back and join with the others. I don't know if anybody at this point wants to share any responses to either Mark or Ruth. It's not necessary, as I say. We don't have to have this all sorted in the next 5 minutes. We'll come back to this at a church meeting in terms of actually whether there are things we want to say or whether there are things we want to do. But does anyone want to respond at this point?
Can I just say, sorry. Can I just say one more thing? Is in terms of all this carbon reduction, I didn't make the within the carbon conversation group. It does talk about making targets realistic for yourself and have long-term targets. So all these changes, I think Ruth alluded to it, but it's not something we necessarily do straight away, but they will be long term. So kind of for us, with going on a 5 year plus plan to reduce our carbon footprint.
I was just going to say, I don't know about anyone else, but I think for me, lockdown has been really, well, you know, so many different kind of emotions. But one thing that I've really realised is that I don't need to keep going to London on the train for meetings, and what a blessing that is. So, you know, all the meetings that I normally would jump on a train, do one meeting in a day or 2 meetings in a day and then come home again. I really want to change the way that we operate. So, you know, last week we had a board meeting where 9 of us were there, and normally we'd have gone to London, spent 500 quid to get us all there, come back again. I'm not going to do that again. And it's really been fantastic to actually do some of those meetings, you know, remotely. I'm not suggesting that I want to live my life on Zoom. I definitely don't. But I think, you know, just in terms of a business sense, really, this has been, and I think that lots of people will be feeling the same, that you don't need to just get on a train for an hour's meeting and then come back again and spend 500 quid. So that's been good for me.
I think it proves it can be done.
Pardon?
It proves it can be done.
Yeah,
exactly. On Zoom and online and other means. You don't have to jump on a train to go to a meeting. You can do it online because you have to.
Exactly.
With my sorry.
Oh, go for it, Rob.
yeah, just with my work, we've been getting inquiries about vertical farming. So basically, farming in the UK on a more industrial sort of manufacturing type scale, but to grow tomatoes and berries and things like that. And obviously, due to COVID and securing food supply, and it's in some ways you think, great, that means a few miles and everything else, but then at the same time you wonder about the economic effect and localism and protectionism and all of I don't think it's necessarily an easy thing just to say we won't do that, because everything's so tied in with everything else. And yeah, it'd be great to not have to import so much food, but then there's a bunch of people in Spain who are going to be without jobs then. So how do we manage that, and how do we reorientate our economies to be doing stuff that's not damaging the environment, but actually still giving people useful work to do and all the rest of it? It's not easy.
Okay, I've been given a message to say that the other group are in the main room waiting for us.